Welcome, Nick.
Thanks.
So you and I had some discussion before your talk today, and one of the things that we talked about is the idea of a go-to creative practice that folks might have. And so can you give some examples of what that might be? And so here's the question we're going to start with. Is there something in your creative practice that is a go-to? And tell us a little bit more about that, Nick.
Yeah, for example, like in my work up until like 5 years ago, I was really known for my use of bold colors. And that became kind of like a safe thing for me to do, where I knew I didn't have to risk that much to make something that people enjoyed. But so whether you're a chef and you have a dish that you know will please, or you're a musician and you know there's like a certain like song structure that will always get good results, that's what I'm talking about. And then so being aware of that and then intentionally deviating from that, at least in your own private practice, so that you can continue to grow and discover.
Yeah, and so as we're kind of going through this talk this morning, that's something for you all to be thinking about is, what is your go-to creative practice? And so for me, as a professional facilitator, I use this protocol called Microlab Protocol, and it is a way for people to have a conversation. And I do that so often. And so what this made me think about, Nick, is how I might change that, how I might do something different in my workshops. So then the second question that we have for you all to think about as we're getting started is this: what feelings does it conjure in you when you think of changing just one element of that go-to practice? So maybe you can talk a little bit about how you do this in your own work.
And so, like, I mean, I'm going to speak in broad strokes here, but I know that my mind, like, I'm a creative and my mind is just all over the place. And when it comes to my techniques, I don't have like the scientific analytical mind as much. Like, I had to kind of learn that, like f-stops and ISO and aperture and focal distance and all those things. That took decades for me to internalize that. But at the time, it was just like, like, I know how to make cool things. But the way I remember stuff is like, okay, once I do a technique long enough, like let's say I'm doing motion blur, and I've done that for like a year and I really understand it. So now what it would be like, let me consider what's moving. Is the subject moving? Is the light moving? Am I moving the camera? And once I do a shoot just focused on that one element, and then I can understand what has changed, and then I can replicate that. And then I can kind of keep baby stepping in that direction, making these small changes, like more like a scientific experiment. Like if you have your controls and then you have one thing that can change, then you can understand the change.
So when I'm thinking about your filters, for example, and then like how some of them are broken and that one additional element and how much it changes the image, like that's kind of what that reminds me of.
And not being afraid to break stuff. It's like, it seemed ridiculous, like, because like I made these filters for me, and then like people that follow me started being like, are you selling these? I want to buy them. And I'm like, but like they're so imperfect. Like some are like have little hairs or insects that landed in them because I make them in my garage, or like some of them I'll smash them just to see what happens. But that's where the magic comes. And the fact that people want to buy those, I feel kind of silly putting it in a padded envelope and shipping off this thing I smashed with a hammer. But yeah.
So what I hear you talking about in your emotional journey as an artist is that finding these techniques and then making that one change is actually a really exciting kind of, use the word magical sort of experience for you. And so I think that's something that, like, as artists, as creatives, to be able to take that away, that making that one change, it might be scary, but it can also be part of this like really positive emotional journey as an artist.
And it puts me on the same page as my subject. Like if I'm doing a shoot and I'm exploring an idea that I've never done before, and it's like, whether it's a client that hired me or just a model or a musician, someone that I know that we're collaborating with, whatever pops up on the back of the camera is a surprise to both of us, because I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. And then we're both like, oh man, like, and so we're kind of aligned in that, which is beautiful. It's not just like, oh yeah, I'm awesome and you need to recognize that. It's like we're like both viewing it together, like we're true collaborators.
Yeah, I feel that way about Creative Mornings in the community. So I completely understand that. That's my art. It's like the gathering. So would you like to show us some of your art and talk a little bit about
let's do it.
Great.
Okay, so I press the...
Yep, just the big button right there.
So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I'm going to start by showing you like around 10 images of work that I made from like 2016 to like 2019. And this is when I got my first studio. Like it was in this office downtown, this like 300 square feet drop ceiling. So office more than a studio. But before that, I was working out of my basement, so it was still a step up. But I started going through this manic phase of productivity because now I had a dedicated space. So I was shooting every day, sometimes several times a day, just exploring ideas. And I was making art that I was really proud of, but like making a long story short, I have like childhood trauma. Who else childhood trauma? Anyone? Yeah. So unbeknownst to me at the time, I had this like increasing anxiety of like my followers are my like parents, for lack of a better term, or the people I'm seeking approval from. And so if it's not well received, then I'm like, oh, I must be doing something wrong. I must not be making something that's great because I'm not being validated, you know? So I was kind of going through this phase and my anxiety was increasing the more followers I got. And I was like teaching around the world and like doing all this stuff, but my anxiety was kind of going through the roof. And then so I finally just like left social media. I deleted everything. I had no plans on returning. I left like 60,000 followers behind. And it felt like I wasn't going to survive, like, you know, because everything you hear is that, you know, you need to market yourself as an artist, blah, blah, blah. And so I felt this, I was between a rock and a hard place where I can't leave this, but I hate it. And I finally was just like, whatever, it's not worth it. I'm leaving and we'll see what happens. And what ended up happening was once I was off the grid, like disconnected from everything, I finally had the space to like really explore what was going on in me. I had been in therapy for years, but I started going to like support groups for adult survivors of childhood abuse. Like I started like looking at photo books because my studio, I have hundreds of photo books. And I was like, man, when I look through these, I feel inspired versus when I would scroll through Pinterest or Instagram or whatever, I feel like something is being taken out of me. Like I'm diminished and I feel this like, I'm never going to survive. I'm never going to be able to compete again, you know. But looking through the photo books, I was like, man, I'm so inspired. Like, look at this thing this guy made in 1940. I want to see how I can do that. And like just using practical effects. So I just started playing like, okay, I got a panel of glass. Let me just cover it in coconut oil. Like, what will happen? Like, it looks kind of cool. Like, it looks like paintbrush strokes, you know? What if I take this filter from the hardware store? Like I would go to like Hobby Lobby or Lowe's or wherever and just walk up and down the aisles looking for stuff that makes cool textures that either reflects light or lets light through it. So it was like, do I shoot through this? Do I bounce light into it? Like just, it became like a scavenger hunt. Like I was like rediscovering the world and like my place within it. Like this is like a panel that goes over like fluorescent lighting in an office. Let me smash a hand, like let's stab with a screwdriver and see what, like shoot through it, you know? Then the pandemic hit. And I was like, oh, like I still want to shoot. People were like, I heard people were doing shoots over FaceTime and I was like, what does that mean? Like, and then I realized people either taking photos of their computer screen or they would click the button in the FaceTime. But then I was like, well, that quality is still low res. So what could I do to make more interesting images that are high res? So this model is in Berlin and I just hung this piece of fabric I got from Hobby Lobby and just shot through it. And if you shoot it out of focus, like and you're focused on the texture, it looks similar to if she was in my studio and I did the same technique. So it wasn't like I could necessarily replicate them being there, but depending on the technique, I could get something that felt close. Then I started thinking about like light movement or time exposure. So what happens if the subject is stationary, I'm stationary, and the light's moving? So my assistant Seth is twirling a strand of LEDs. And also this one, it was like I was looking for old like busted lenses on eBay and I found one that was like 20 bucks, it had fungus growing in it. And I was like, let's see what that does. And I was like, it makes this really cool glowing thing. Like, and so that's like one of my favorite lenses. And it's just funny that I like, again, I put that in like my camera case that's all padded next to the $2,000 lens. It's the fungus $20 lens, you know? That same shoot, let me wrap your arm in LEDs and then you just move them. What'll happen? That happens. I work with dancers a lot, especially when I'm exploring a new technique, because they don't need my direction. They already know how to move like elegantly. So I can just sit there and like fiddle around with the back of the camera controls and just be like, okay, just move and then take breaks when you're tired. And like, for this one, I was like, let me wrap you in LEDs and see what happens. So like dancing around, painting with their body, and then pop the strobe, and that's what freezes. So that mixture of time, like continuous light with strobe, is what gets that effect. This one, what happens if I pop the light multiple times, like during say like a 5-second exposure? So the dancer's moving, and I'm just like pop, 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 and just like moving from like high to low, and so it becomes this collaboration where it's just like I'm almost becoming a choreographer in a way, where I'm just like, no, move more like this, and like the frame around you is like a blank canvas and your body is the paintbrush, so just move like that. What happens if I project something moving? Like I pulled up a fractal video on YouTube, 5 hours of fractals, speed it up super time, and then have the model or the dancer move, and then I'll do multiple exposures. And so with each movement, there's a different part of the video playing. So I never know what's going to happen. Like it's just like a what if. And then I have decades of art history and experience shooting, so I know to keep pushing, where I'm just like, that's kind of cool, but it could be better. And like, I'm going to keep going. And I wait until I have that holy shit moment in a shoot. And then that's when me and the model both went, okay, now we got it. That's the direction. Now let's play, using like fiber optic paintbrushes. Like there's a flashlight that cycles through colors. So I'm just like twirling around and the colors are changing. That's the shot of just the brush strokes. And then with my camera, I can do multiple exposures in camera. So I could pull up that brush stroke image and then it overlays on my viewfinder. So then I can compose and take a silhouette shot and it just shows through the shadows. I did the shoot with this Olympian volleyball player, Jordan Larson, for ESPN like earlier this year. And so when I think about like a commission, or it's like, who am I going to photograph? What is it about them? Like she's known for her serve. So I started thinking about what of my techniques would be the best to showcase that. Like, and I was like, oh, okay, maybe I'll wrap her in LEDs and have her serve a volleyball like I did with the dancer stuff, And so I was like, okay, well, this isn't a practice facility in like Anaheim. Like, do you have a room that's like dark in the middle of the day? And they're like, oh, we have this conference room. So I just went and set up a like a black tablecloth, wrapped her in LEDs, and shot it. And then this is a guitarist named Marcin, and he is known for just like really insanely fast like guitar picking and stuff. And he wanted to explore this theme of dragons. And so he was like, I'm thinking like my arms are like dragon wings. And I was like, okay, well, let's just do like a base layer where you're moving your arms in the light, and then we'll pop the strobe, and then that'll freeze you. And so once I explained to him, because he's a musician, I was like, he was like doing like this. I was like, no, like he was like, I want it to look like there's ribs in the wings. And I was like, so more like staccato, like, and he was like, okay. And then it became this, and this was the first shoot of the day, and there was like the whole creative team, and I'm not a musician and he's not a photographer, but like we kind of like synced up, and like everyone in the room got like silent, and like it was just like me and him, and it was just like kind of magical moment. Like I didn't know that would happen when I went into the shoot. He didn't know it would happen, but we just like recognized it was happening and let it happen. So this one ended up on the cover, or one for the set with this dragons projected on him. But then I was like, well, let's do a version 2, because the projector is a continuous light source. So if I use a long exposure and I move my camera, but then I pop a strobe on you, you'll be frozen, but then the dragon will go to blurring, which kind of tracks with the concept of the album. And sorry the colors are all screwy on the TV. It looks better, I promise. It's like hard to see detail on these. This one, this band, they're called the Royal She, and set up this mylar behind them, and mylar is metallic, it's reflective, but it can move because it's real thin. So I'll either have the subject like with their hands behind their back tapping the mylar, or I'll put an oscillating fan on so it's moving. And then I have lights that cycle through color, and then I'll have a strobe that like will freeze the action. So it's this mixture of like, depending on how the metal mylar is moving or which color is cycling through, each result's going to be wildly different. So I can just kind of stand there and just be like click, 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 and every single shot is wildly different. And then again, like we're looking at the images together and we're just like, holy shit, like what's that? Like, where's that coming from? That electricity looking stuff, you know? And so a lot of people tell me when they see my work, they're like, they think that I spend hours in Photoshop or I'm like some brilliant, like forethought kind of person. I'm not either. Even today, I didn't plan my talk at all because it overwhelms me. And I'm like, I'll just pull together images and I know what I can say about these. I could talk to a stranger about art making. So I'll just curate those and just talk about those, you know? So it's just like learning your limitations, learning how to like set yourself up for success, not trying to be someone else, like not getting intimidated by this worked for them, it should work for me. Like that's just not the way the world works. Shooting through different types of film, like this is like a ring light that cycles through color, and then I got this window film that people hang over their windows because it turns sunlight into rainbows. I'm like, what happens if I put that over the camera or the light, and then it changes the light source? And so there's just, whenever I see anything, I'm just like, what would that do? This one, like, let me print out, and this was another thing I did during the pandemic. It's like, print out a photo, even if it's like you take a screen cap through, if you're doing a FaceTime, it's like this big, but if you use a macro lens and you can get real tight on it, then you can increase the resolution. So I'd put them in a tray of water and just shake the water. And I have lights that change colors as the water is moving. So then you have the ripples become rainbow specular highlights. Paint and water, this was last year, acrylic paint and water, and photographing that and then using that for a multiple exposure. And again, like I don't know what's gonna happen when it, and sorry again for the resolution, it's really blown out, it looks better on the website. And this is like seltzer water with food dye. Looks like the creation of the universe. And centered it around her head, and it looks crazy. Like it looks like Teletubbies' son. And so I'm like, I didn't know that was gonna be that, but it's fucking awesome. Drizzled a bunch of paint on it. It was like, we had a good friend of ours, an amazing painter, Aaron Troyer. Check out his work, it's amazing. He had a bunch of extra paint from painting a mural in our garage, so I took it all to the studio and just drizzled it all on a piece of black foam cord, took a photo of it, like Jackson Pollock style, then took a photo of the model, and it popped through, and I was like, oh, that's so cool. And so from going from like last year doing all of like the paint and water or food dye and water, then moving into paint, then I started getting into like, all right, sorry, this out of order. There's a machine shop in the fort where my studio is, and I took photos of the machinery and then overlaid it with a model. Or the patina on the door at the fort that said keep. I was like, oh, that looks cool. And then like overlay it. But here, like the epoxy resin stuff I have over here, there's like filters, there's like UV filters, there's ones that you just handheld. But my buddy was like, my buddy Rory was like, you should check out epoxy resin, because like the same stuff you're doing with the fluid, like ink and water, it's the same, but then it's permanent, you know? So like, I started exploring that, like photographing that, photograph the person, and then it shows through it. Or I make the little filter, and some of them I would crack, and I would put it in a spot like we have over here and project it. That's my buddy Travis Shin. He's an incredible photographer in LA, like kind of my godfather in a way. This is the filter on the lens, and you can see how when the light hits the lens, it creates this crazy lens flare structure, and that's from the cracked glass. So it's like that expression, like if you want to make an omelet, you have to break some eggs. It's like if you want to make bokeh, you have to crack some glass. So that's my very short, oh, right on time, 16 seconds over.
Nick Fancher.
Thank you.